Hello I-AMM listeners, this is Pierce Stoneburner, audio engineer for I-AMM. This bonus episode is a recording of our Zoom Town Hall, Police and AMM Communities. To learn about our future events, visit our website at iamm.org, that's i-amm.org, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you can join us at our next event to participate in live discussions and breakout rooms.
Our first panelist is Dr. Amilcar Shabazz. He is a professor of history and Africana studies in the W.E. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His book, Advancing Democracy, African Americans and the Struggle for Access and Equity in Higher Education in Texas, yes, he is from Texas, was the winner of the T.R. Fehrenbach Book Award. The 40 Acres documents, a volume he co-edited, was one of the earliest scholarly works in the modern movement for reparations for slavery. There is much more I can say about Dr. Shabazz, but y'all, you should go look him up. Next, we have our sister Sabina Ibraheem. She has a master's in elementary education, is a Pakistani immigrant mother of 3. She is a longtime activist, a member of IGNA, and a participant in Why Islam events such as Dawah Booth and seminars. In June 2020, the video, this is the epic situation that I was just telling y'all about, the video of Sabina's masterful and heartfelt critique of the Islamic Center's lecture entitled Systematic Racism, but delivered by the Plano police chief, became an overnight sensation on social media. And I want to say that I-AMM actually had a hand in making it go viral. Sara Bawany is our third speaker. She is a clinical social worker, an award-winning published poet, a writer, and a freelance editor. She works at Facing Abuse and Community Environments in Dallas, or FACE, an organization that aims to hold religious and community leaders accountable for abuse in the Muslim community. She recently won Daybreak Press Publishing's Best Poetry Book Award. Her work has been featured on TEDx, the Muslim Youth Musings Literary Magazine, Voyage Dallas Magazine, and Brown Girl Magazine. Next, we have Dr. Maryam Kashani. She's a filmmaker and an assistant professor in Gender and Women's Studies and Asian American Studies affiliated faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where she focuses on racial, ethnic, religious diasporas and transnational political movements, gender and sexuality, Islam and Muslim communities. And last but definitely not least, my former colleague, Dr. Phil Hopkins. He is a professor of philosophy at Southwestern University, where he teaches and writes about the phenomenology of identity, particularly racialized identities and critical race theory, and on the specifically on whiteness, and on the intersections of identity and ethics in contemporary media and consumer culture. Before becoming an academic, he worked for several years as both a police officer and a social worker. So, Sabina and Sara, I wanted to start with a question for y'all about EPIC, and what was your take about the event when y'all did the pushback? What was the response of the East Plano Islamic Center? Were you happy with that response? And what has happened since?
So I'll go first. When we had a chat, we have a group chat, and as soon as I saw the post that there is an event titled this, and then there is a Plano police, I kind of like freaked out, and I immediately said, can I talk to somebody in regards to this? And back and forth people said, and I said, I want that to be stopped. So I did voice my concern right there, but I didn't go all the way. And I said, I would like this event to be stopped. And then from that point, I tried calling anybody who I knew in the admin. I got hold of a few prominent people, and they kind of like supported me. And, they were very good with listening to my concern. And they said, okay, why don't you talk to the board? And they are very open and understanding. And so I was trying to, and I was trying several ways to get in touch with one or any board member. So in the meantime, I talked to one of the panelists, and I tried to convince that panelist that why there is a problem with that, and tried to give her facts and everything, that panelist some facts. And that same evening, I was able to get one of my, the other people who I talked to, arrange a meeting, phone meeting with two of the board members. So I got on phone with them and I again explained everything. They were very respectful in listening. They were patient. They heard everything and they reflected back that they understood everything well. And they said, okay. And of course, I told the same reasons why there's going to be a problem and what could be the repercussions and how could it affect our solidarity with the Black community. And they said that they will take it, they will discuss among themselves and they will decide. Although I want to add one thing, that I told them that when you consult other people, which they said, I said, please make sure you consult not one, but two people from the Black community before you make your final decision. So they said, yeah, I mean, we are going to think and talk and decide.
You mean the final decision of whether or not to actually hold this event?
Yeah, whether to air it or not.
Yeah.
So that was, I think, the day before. And then the next day it did happen. But before that, they brought in one of the downtown Dallas's prominent figure to kind of justify the reason why they were doing it.
And this is a Black imam, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes. So he did that, and after I watched, I said, okay. I mean, they made a point, so it's good.
What was his response? Like, what did he share?
Basically, the gist was that the problem is not the police, according to him. It is the white supremacy and not something on that line. And Sara, correct me if I'm wrong. But he pretty much laid the ground for the upcoming event, kind of like with his blessings, that, there is nothing wrong with addressing and talking to the police. There is the bigger issue is white supremacy and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part is, after the event happened, of course, there was a lot of opposition, protest before the event took place on Facebook and even after also. And one thing I did notice was that, from my perspective, that EPIC has held quite a few programs on addressing racial issues, racism, and all those similar related topics. So there was a program for the youth, there was another program for youth girls, and then one of the panelists has started a book club. She has been doing book club, but the book she chose after that is on a topic of racism. And she has brought in speakers, and I had the opportunity to watch one speaker. She is a UNT professor, and she did a marvelous job of laying down the history of racism and how it's connected with Christianity, and how Christianity found its roots through Christianity, and then it started into anti-Semitism and the other hatreds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So my mom is very involved in EPIC's outreach committee and has been involved with EPIC for the last several years up until now. I used to be, and I'm not as much, I'm not really at all now. So I didn't have the positive experience she had, although I acknowledge that it did happen. And I'm really glad that at bare minimum, they were willing to listen to her, because I know with many other leadership organizations, like, they will very easily shut people down who have any kind of opposition. And my mom is kind of known to, stand up and speak up when she doesn't like something. However, like, it doesn't, and it shouldn't justify the fact that a really troublesome and problematic event happened, right? And it's not for me to bash on the masjid or bash on the institution as a whole, but when hundreds and hundreds of people are speaking up and saying that this is not okay, we're not okay with this, this is like, read the room, this is really the wrong time for something like this. To go against it and then find one person who happens to agree with you, who happens to be Black, to justify the event is so tone deaf and so indicative of these issues within the Muslim community, is that we still don't get it. We still don't get it. Like, the world is falling apart. There are uprisings everywhere. People are dying. People are being shot, and we still don't get it. And that's just, at the end of the day, that's all it is. And so, quite honestly, despite the fact that they were willing to listen immediately and, were hearing my mom's concerns, it was extremely disappointing to see that not only did they go through with the event, but it seemed to be pre-recorded. They said it was live and it wasn't live. They turned off the comments on YouTube, etc., in some effort to silence people who were still continuing to speak out about the event. The petition that our coalition launched, I believe, obtained 800 or 900 signatures in like 12 hours around the country, which was kind of a huge deal. Of course, I think if it had been up for longer, it would have garnered more because so many people around the country voiced their discomfort for something like this. And of course, I haven't been keeping up with like what they've done to rectify it, but to my knowledge, there was never really a public apology. The only thing they did was they brought in the former Imam of Masjid al-Islam, I believe his name is Imam Khalid, who's a very well-respected person in the community, but also has a very different position than most of the Black community. And Masjid al-Islam, once they heard his position and saying that, no, it's fine to collaborate with the police, were, from what I heard, very upset. And they said, this is not our official position. I don't know why he's saying that. And so no disrespect to him, he is entitled to his own opinion, and it's not our job to tell him about his experiences. But when my mom said consult with 2 Black Muslims, she meant 2 Black Muslims with differing opinions too, not just the one that happens to agree with the ethic board. And of course, like the statement itself that the problem is not police, the problem is white supremacy, is very contradictory to me, because the police itself is rooted and was created out of a white supremacist institution. So it's all connected and it's all one and the same. And I think people really need to do a better job, and especially the Muslim community, of digging back to our roots. Yeah, so all around it was extremely disappointing, and I've seen that they've continued to hold different discussions and book clubs and whatnot. But it's unfortunate to say, I think the people who were hosting the panel have not proven to be, by the larger community, have not proven to be experts on the subject of race or police brutality. So I don't necessarily see how continuing to hold discussions and talks on race is any more helpful if the wider community, at least from to my knowledge, does not seem to trust their expertise.
Absolutely. So if Epic came to you and said, we want to do it differently, what would you suggest? And also, what do y'all, if you could give me a sentence about what was wrong with the event, what would that sentence be?
Are seeing backlash from people around the country and choose not to listen. And I mean, and you know, one could say that it was like the younger generation who was primarily upset, but there were a lot of people from the older generations that were also upset. And I think just a little bit of what I've heard about the culture at Epic right now is that young people there don't have a voice the way they used to. And so they're further silenced, especially when they're leading something like this. But again, it wasn't just us. Like my mom was one of the most prominent people at the forefront, and they listened to her, but it was surface level, and there was nothing that was done. Mm-hmm. If I had to say like one sentence about the event itself, it was titled Systemic Racism, and I think that's what it was, Systemic Racism in the Community. And
the title was, let me tell you what the title was. Systemic Racism and Open Discussion About Policing Policies with Plano Police Chief.
Yeah, Systemic Racism and Open Discussion. And it was like kind of right in the heat of all the rallies and the protests and everything. The uprisings that were happening around the country. And first of all, like the event itself, there was really no mention about systemic racism. It was really just, policing policies that really have nothing to do with these larger police precincts that had not only a week before, like half an hour downtown in Dallas, had arrested several people, tear gassed several people. And, kind of like thanking them like, well, we're thankful this hasn't happened to us. And it's like, you're thanking them for not being animals? Like, I don't understand. Or thanking them for their time in the military, but also like asking them questions. And everything about it, everything we heard that was meant to justify it just kind of ended up being the opposite. And unfortunately, it just wasn't, like, even if we tried to give the event a chance, like, it just wasn't helpful. It really did feel like a political stunt. And like my mom said, like, they had every opportunity to try and stop it, to listen to the people in the community, to ask more than one person who agreed with them about, is this event okay? And they just chose not to.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna jump into the first question, and I want to start with the two of you. And the first question is, abolish the police is not a monolithic movement. All see the phrase as a call to completely rethink the very concept of law enforcement in this country, but the organizers don't seem to agree on the details. One thing is clear, and that is that the invitation is to go beyond what is realistic. This is a call for a wrought and a root and branch transformation. So with all that in mind, what exactly does abolish the police mean to you? What do you deem is more preferable to a pragmatic reformist agenda, if that is your position? What would you say to folks who see this position as a politically toxic framework, that will boost Trump or undercut the BLM movement?
You want to go, Sara? Okay. I'm going to speak from my perspective, where I kind of like what I'm hearing on the ground and with my community and my friends and people who I speak to. So, or even the community leaders also. So when we talk about, or the topic of revamping police or abolishing police comes, the biggest fear that comes to mind and over again is so the thought is that, oh my gosh, they are talking about lawlessness, which means there'll be no one to call if there is a burglary, or no one to call if there is something wrong. So this is the biggest fear, I think, among at least people I talk to. So that means that we will have no police, means no one to take care of criminals and no one to take care of crimes. So I think that is also one of the biggest inhibiting factor into leaping into this whole conversation. They want to shy away from it because they are not sure what this whole thing means.
Yeah, so to that, I would say, I know, like, abolition and abolishing the police, like you said, looks very different according to the different communities you come from. And I think one thing, especially from the Muslim community's perspective, that it's really important and critical to understand is that if we make it about the Muslim community for a second, because they keep unfortunately wanting to center themselves in this issue when it's not really just about them as a whole. The police, the police force and law enforcement in this country has never actually been friends with the Muslim community. It's all very surface level. It's all really quite a facade. If you look at CVE and if you look at the informant programs that happened after 9/11, and the FBI still infiltrating and still showing up at the houses of prominent Muslim community leaders and members to this day, this facade that the police have been friends with us is a joke. It's just not real.
Sara, a literacy moment, going back to what you said about CB. Can you open that up and talk about that a little bit? Not too much, just.
I don't know all the details, and I don't want to say anything wrong. So I don't know if someone else can elaborate on it, but I would have to go back and research it. I know about the existence of it. I know a little bit, but I don't think I can speak much to it.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
And then also, to people who say that abolishing the police is a really radical idea or that it doesn't exist, it's just because people in this country for a very long time have never seen what it's like to live without this heavy police presence, or people in this country don't quite understand the heavy policing that goes on in Black and Brown communities in the lesser funded areas of the city. So they don't actually quite understand and seem to get how heavily people are policed for no real reason, how heavily things are criminalized for no real reason, like nonviolent crimes. And if we just look at examples around the world of places where the police don't have as much of a presence, you can think of Sweden, where they've almost virtually nearly abolished the police, and they have a very different model for what policing looks like. Scotland has a violence reduction unit. Switzerland has an alternative sentencing approach, and Finland has a housing first strategy. And so it's there's so many models around the world of what less policing looks like and what it looks like to invest more in your community, so that crime, or whatever people in this country call crime, is not as prevalent as it could be. And we know that crime comes from underfunding communities and underfunding of resources and education. And it's not a radical thing to want to abolish the police. It's actually something that would with reinvesting the funds into proper community resources would really make our economy and our people in our country thrive. But because we are so interested in increasing the wage gap and in letting specific people have power and in squashing the power of others, it's deemed as a radical idea, but it's not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sara. Phil, Dr. Shabazz, where are y'all on this issue of abolition versus police reform?
You can't tinker around the edges or try to just sort of reform policing as it's structured in this country because of its history, but because of its more fundamental sort of systemic purpose, which is to maintain order and to primarily maintain order by segregating, right, communities from each other and identifying certain communities as suspicious and dangerous and policing and monitoring those communities in order to protect, as Dr. Kashani was saying, the privileges and the well-being of other communities. So when people say, what are we going to do when we abolish the police? Like, what's it going to look like? I always just say, well, just go into any affluent white neighborhood near you and you'll see what it looks like not to have sort of policing. You'll see what it looks like for communities to sort of exist without a constant police presence policing them, right? Unless they get really out of line. And so, those communities are not full of smarter people. They're not full of more moral people. They're full of people that have well-being and economic sort of support. And so, as several people were already saying, I think the push to defund police is the push to reinvest in the more systemic and structural issues that create the problems we think need policing in the contemporary world, and which we try to address with a system of policing that is still stuck in a past.
Thank you, Phil. Dr. Shabazz.
Thank you. Yes, I definitely don't see the call for defund and the different actions going on in this moment as having a pro-Trump effect. And I think that kind of reaction is something merely to sort of, silence the push for deeper thinking, more radical thinking, more, as has been said, trying to really drill down to the root of the problem. I've been in conflict with the police and the communities I've lived in for most all of my life. And I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, and the police were part of defending a Jim Crow order. I was born 60 years ago, and they were part of defending a Jim Crow order, American-style apartheid. And, even when bills were passed and efforts were made and they start hiring Black people in places they would never hire, and we start electing Black people to different offices, one thing that never really ever came up, there was never a reckoning about, it was the police. And how does the police need to change if society now recognizes people of African descent as full human beings invested with the full rights of American citizenship or full human rights as human beings? If that's the case now, how does this armed police force that used to jail us and shoot us and beat us for trying to demand our human rights, how must it now change? And just to say, well, to hire some Black people to the police force, no, you had Black people under the Jim Crow police force. They couldn't arrest white people. but they were on the Jim Crow police force, and they would have different specific assignments in the Black community, in certain areas of the Black community, basically to surveil, and then to let white people know if something was going on, to then go in and arrest and crack heads. So to hire more Black people in an already racist and already command and control structure that's designed to maintain an unequal and inequitable status quo, again, where's the rethinking of the police? And so I didn't see it in the 70s. I didn't see it in the 80s. I didn't see it in the 90s. We get into the new millennium. I'm looking for it. Then you elect Barack Obama, and everybody says, but I'm like, that's still more of the same. That's still just putting a Black face in a space where it had only been white people, and now we think that's changed things. No, if the structure is still anti-Black, if the thinking of the people hired in these jobs, their anti-Blackness is still never questioned, then to me, I don't see where change is happening. I don't know where do we get to a new place with policing. So yes, now I'm fully with defund. I've put in the chat room information and link to the Breathe Act. These are, of course, measures that are still, to me, they're not revolution. They're not revolutionary measures. Understand that. But they are measures that within the law and order and peaceful framework of America, if we can move toward these, they enable us to try to exhaust all possibilities within this democratic framework to have a more humane, a more human-centered and just society. I don't know that it'll come this way, but I think we've got to try all of those measures, all of those avenues. So look at the Breathe Act, look at what it's saying, and yes, this is definitely, I wholeheartedly endorse this new direction that I see people are raising. Even here in my little place where I live now in Amherst, Massachusetts, where we put our police chief on the spot of some of these things, and he talked about how none of his officers have drawn a gun in 42 years. Well, we had to call him on. It wasn't quite true. We had a little uproar of some of our students in 2014, and they pulled pepper spray guns and fired pepper projectiles, 500 rounds more than our UMass police department. So we had to catch them a little bit. But then again, the police here, no, there's not been any big overarching problems. The chief, I get along with the chief. I've met with him many times. He's posed with me in front of a Black Lives Matter banner and then says he endorses, it doesn't want that kind of thing to happen here that we've seen all over the country. But again, it's not about the individuals. It's not about more different kind of training. It's about fundamentally, how do we move away from this crime and punishment, this kind of model of society that grew up and grew out of the genocide of native indigenous people, the enslavement of Black people, and all the other aspects of oppression that have been ingrained. To me, this is the evolution toward a truly human rights centered society that we need to take that step.
Thank you, Dr. Shabazz, and everyone else. I'm going to move on to the second and third questions. So many AM folks are intimately familiar with life in a repressive police state, where police, the military, extrajudicial forces regularly terrorize folks through imprisonment, kangaroo courts, disappearing folks, murdering them. I can go on. My experience has been that it's hard for some of us to think of the U.S. as a police state, and it's easy for us to think of, wow, this is a breeze, compared to what we've experienced. So what would you say, first, so this is the first part of the question, what would you say about them saying the U.S. is not a police state? And then how do you all think about law enforcement in general within the U.S. and U.S. military and imperialist escapades and presence in the Islamic world? Again, Islamic world, when we use the literacy moment, Islamic world basically means that area of the world that it has a predominantly Muslim culture, it doesn't mean that they're all Muslims. Yeah, so how do you make that connection? And also, what would you say to folks who say, you know, life is a breeze here. This is not a police state.
So I will jump in. So I have to explain to my viewers, for those of them who don't know, when we come from Pakistani or Middle Eastern culture, we are not coming from a truly Islamic. That doesn't mean it's a truly Islamic culture. So we have seen, or we grew up seeing, a lot of corruption, especially, and no respect for policing, at least from my background, where I'm coming from. People did not respect. They were easily bought. Like, you know, you could buy and get out of trouble, but just by bribing and everything, most of them. And so when we come here and we see this law and order, we have all of a sudden, we have a lot of awe and respect for our police and our law enforcement, because number one, they are not corrupt. They cannot be bought. They cannot be bribed on the surface. And they are very respectful. And even when they're giving you a ticket, they are very respectful. So from my perspective, I would say that, yes, you know what? They're nice to me. They are very respectful. They don't catch me for that it's something that I'm not doing. So why should I have any problem with the policing? But what I'm learning, and that's really opening my eyes, is that there is a parallel world, but invisible world next to my world, that is very fully functional and very fully in place, full force in place. And that world has a lot of oppression committed by these same law enforcement agency towards the public, the human beings, which are Black, African American. So that gave me a totally different view of my police. And now when I see a police, I say, you're one of them. But before, it was like, oh my gosh, I was filled with awe and respect for them. So I think majority of people in my generation have this hard time understanding that where we are coming from, we are bringing a lot of history behind, or the experiences that we are bringing. But when we see and most of them, keep in mind, we live in suburbs. We live in generally economically affluent, not affluent, but upper middle class neighborhood. So as Dr. Shabazz just said, that if you want to see what it looks like, go to a neighborhood. And that to me was, so what we see in ours is how it should be. But for most majority of us, we think this is the way it is across the United States. And the second thing I would feel is that many people who don't understand this, they feel that by having a narrative against the police, we are being a traitor. We are not being loyal to this new country that has given us home and has given us the opportunity to flourish and excel in whatever we put our minds to. So I think that's where the perspective of my generation of immigrant Muslims come from. And I'm speaking from people that I know, and I'm representing myself.
Thank you, Sabina.
I can speak a little bit personally too about this as well. As a young person, I did plenty of things where I could have encountered the police in ways that would have made my life turn out really differently. But because of the body I embody, I knew that I was treated very differently. And I'd been stopped by the police in my car with friends, and knowing that encounter could have turned out quite differently, I recognized how those privileges that I experienced in terms of what Sister Sabina was talking about are directly related to how other bodies are policed in our society, right? And I think for folks who haven't experienced the kind of brutality that we see a lot now in the media, that we've been seeing for centuries, I think it's our responsibility to recognize that our own sort of perceived sense of law and order, our own perceived sense of safety and security is is really on the backs of other populations, right? Predominantly Black and brown populations that are heavily, heavily policed, right? And I think it's also important to recognize that there is a certain image that the especially Muslim immigrant population, the South Asian, Arab populations are predominantly middle and upper middle class or wealthy, and that's actually just not true too as well. They're especially in the Bay Area, in New York, and in other places around the country, there are immigrant populations that are also feeling this level of policing, this level of suspicion in terms of their own everyday lives as well. So I think it's also important to recognize that the narrative is really broad. And also through my work with Believers Bailout, we've seen that this general impression of the police not being bad, right, and being here for our safety and security often backfires. When people will call the cops for some domestic reason, they actually start to learn and experience how the police will treat them, and how the police will often bring violence, often bring incarceration into their scenario in ways that they didn't expect because they haven't had to deal with them on a daily basis. So I think this has been really important for our work too, to actually educate the Muslim communities we work with on what their rights are in regards to dealing with the police and like the FBI and things along those lines, right? To not automatically trust that they have your best interests at heart. And so this has been really important as well.
Yeah, thank you, Maryam. Thank you, Sabina. Because of time, I'm just wondering if Phil and Sara have something short to add to that, and we'll wrap it up with insights. Hopefully, maybe something to say about imperialism and a connection between the two.
Sure. So something I think people aren't paying, there's a lot that has been said that's really important and worth amplifying, but in the interest of time, I'll just bring up something that I think people aren't paying a lot of attention to, and that is the way in which, over the past 2 decades in particular, police forces have actively recruited veterans. And I think there's a really important question to ask about what is foundational about the way we look at policing that we think a soldier would be good for that job, but that's a separate question. I think what's worth pointing out is that those veterans, at least for the past couple of decades, have often been in arenas in which those who are marked as Muslim or presumed to be Muslim are identified as the enemy. And then they bring that perspective back with them into these police departments. And there were 2 studies by the Islamophobia Studies Journal. I think one was in 2011 and one was like in 2014. And in those studies, the majority of police officers, not just the veterans, but the majority of police officers had negative perceptions about those who were marked with emblems of Muslim identity, right? And considered them to be dangerous and a threat.
I'll quickly add as well,
Yeah.
like a lot of the Muslims, in addition to what Dr. Phil was saying, is like the way we change that is by inviting them and showing them that we're not that bad, and just like having tea with them, and like that doesn't work, and we've historically seen that doesn't work, just because of the fact that our communities are still heavily policed, even though we may not know it. And just going back to the original question of why we would say the U.S. is becoming a police state. So all it means to be a police state is it's a government that exercises power through the control and power of the police force, and also having laws in place that allow the government to infiltrate, private conversations, our technology, etc. And we know that George W. Bush passed that law, that they have been monitoring what we do, and especially Muslim communities are primarily targeted in those laws. And in general, like if you see like the history of police militarization in America, this really started specifically in like after the 1967 riots in Detroit, and with the beginning of the war on drugs. And so it allowed police to have access to military grade weapons. And then you also look at the 1033 program, which, yeah, allowed law enforcement agencies to get their hands on military hardware. And you've seen between 1997 and 2014 a $5 billion material. $5 billion in material was transferred from the Department of Defense to local law enforcement. And I'm reading some stuff because I don't want to get my numbers wrong, but like you just see that the police budgets have increased significantly over time. And that's why we say the police need to be defunded, is primarily those military grade weapons are weapons they don't need and they're using to hurt our communities.
Thank you. I think Dr. Shabazz, before you go, Maryam wanted to just add one thing. Go ahead, Maryam.
Yeah, and I think Sara was about sort of speaking to this. I think it's also important to remember, even if we're thinking that this doesn't look like a police state, if we actually look at how much as a country we spend on policing and on the sort of entire carceral system, you can say that we actually are a carceral society, right? That the amount of money that goes to police, to courts, to prisons, to jails, right? Things like $182 billion a year. And it's probably much more than that at this point. If we think about how much we spend on the military, right? We are a military state, we are a police state, and just in terms of where we put our like priorities financially, right? Just in Chicago, where I live, you know, the city closed a number of elementary schools a few years ago under Rahm Emanuel. The level of protest to that is nothing compared to the level of protesting, or the level of like angst about defunding the police, right? Like the fact that we can question the closing of schools and hospitals and get really nervous about defunding the police even just by half, right, speaks to the level of carcerality in our society.
Thank you, Maryam. Dr. Shabazz.
Yeah, it's all very much linked, and you have to look at the police state that does exist here from those who are most directly living it, and be very, very, very honest about it. I'm thinking back to when I was an undergrad in Austin, and I never really did any of the UT sports or football or anything like that, but I had a cousin 1 year younger. He had started at Oklahoma, and Oklahoma and UT were meeting in the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. And he said, let's get together. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. And I said, okay. So I said, I have to figure out how I'm going to get there. Well, my neighbors, I lived in Riverside Apartments, and I had there were two young white women who were apartment mates right across their door, right across from ours. They were both from Dallas, and they said, hey, we're going home that weekend for the bowl. Why don't you, ride with us? You then hook up with your cousin, ride back with us when the weekend is over. I said, cool. We'll get out there to Dallas. Well, some things happened on my cousin's in Oklahoma. He ended up not making it to Dallas. So here I am kind of stuck with my two friends from the apartment. And they were very, very congenial. One of them, the more working class one, whose parents were school teachers, she said, you stay with us. We got a room for you. The other one was a very affluent girl from a part of Dallas called Highland Park. And so her dad was having Debbie over, and of course that meant me too. And so we're over at their house in Highland Park. I don't think they'd ever had anybody black there except people to work there. They had a black butler. The black butler's looking at me strange, from as soon as I walk in, thought it was a guess who's coming to dinner kind of situation. So he's like, oh, is he with Debbie? Is he with the other girl? And I'm like, I'm not, brother, I had to calm him down. I'm not with either of them. It's okay. But anyway, all of this to say, when we left there to kind of just go out to dancing in a little club, whatever it was, Cotton Eye Joe, they were going to teach me the Cotton Eye Joe. We're driving out, and beautiful Highland Park suburb, all of that. The police are there. They're just not there like they are in the hood, but they are there. So boom, they pull out behind Debbie and my other friend. And I'm sitting in the back seat. No tail light out, no, Sandra Bland, went in the wrong lane without a signal, driving perfectly, but they stopped the car. What do you think the problem was? So they come, the officer, a couple of white guys, hand on the gun and everything. They put their head in and they, are you girls all right? Are you girls all right? And looking back in the back at me, And so Debbie got indignant and said, you know, what did you stop us for, officer? What did you stop us for? Oh, it's because of our friend, and it's our friend, huh? No. And I'm like, calm down, Debbie. We don't need to have all of this protest right here, right now, please. You know, I'm kind of trying to signal that to her. But so obviously I wasn't killed, but I did fear for my life. I did fear for my life in Highland Park, but we got out of there. They were all upset after that. And by the way, when I met the lawyer, the daughter who lived in Highland Park, the young woman, her father was an attorney, and he was laughing. He was happy to meet me. I guess once he knew I wasn't dating his daughter or something, but he was so happy to meet me. He was telling me, you know, I want to thank you. Your people are who've made me rich. How I'm out here in Highland Park, rich as I am, is representing your black people in all kind of, you know, crime in the criminal justice system. So I looked at all of those interconnections from that really weird weekend, and I'll tell you, it's just been part of. I said before, this police thing has been in my life my whole life. And it's whether I'm in the suburbs, whether I'm in East Austin in the hood, my political education, I'm at UT. In 79, 2 plainclothes white officers killed a man named Grill Couch, just chokehold him at a barbecue pit. You know, thought he was out of hand and just did what they did to George Floyd to him. We protested, we raised hell, we did all of this. They said, well, maybe a reform, we ought to think about chokeholds. Nothing happened. Nothing happened to the officers. Nothing happened to, you know, Grill Couch dead. So it's been on and on. So for me, you know, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, I'm just like, how long is this going to go on? What does it take to stop this police state that's killing us? And that's why, for me, this is the moment. And we need the allyship. We need the comradeship. We need everybody in on this. If you are not having any problems with police, like I said, right now, where I am, I'm in no problem. Little tiny college town of Amherst. But you know what? I still know that police state is out there. It's out there, and it's deadly. And we all have skin in the game. So that's my piece on that.